Muhammad Ali was more than just a boxer. He was a global icon, a revolutionary, and an inspiration to millions. He wasn't just the greatest in the ring, but also one of the most influential figures in sports history. When he passed away in 2016, the world mourned the loss of a man who had changed the game forever. His funeral was attended by thousands and tributes poured in from world leaders, athletes, and fans. What if we told you that his story didn't end there 9 years after his passing? Something shocking was discovered inside his tomb. What was meant to be his final resting place soon became the center of an eerie mystery. Scientists, cemetery workers, and city officials were left in disbelief after an emergency opening. Of his crypt, what they found defied logic and left experts stunned. How could this be possible? What was happening inside Muhammad Ali's grave? The answers would leave the world in shock for decades. Muhammad Ali had been more than just a boxer. He was a symbol of strength, courage, and defiance. He had fought inside and outside the ring, not just against opponents, but against racism, war, and even his own body. But by 2016, the fight was coming to an end. Ali's final opponent was one he could not outbox, outtalk, or outlast Parkinson's disease. For more than 3 decades, he had battled the degenerative illness that had slowly taken away his speed, mobility, and even his voice. The once lightning-fast fighter who had floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee was now struggling to walk, to speak, to even lift his hands. Still, Ali never stopped fighting. He continued to make public appearances his mere presence inspiring millions around the world. But by June 2016, his condition had worsened. He was rushed to a hospital in Scottsdale, Arizona. Suffering from respiratory complications, doctors did everything they could. But it was clear Ali's body was too weak to fight back. On June 3rd, 2016, at the age of 74, Muhammad Ali passed away. The world had lost. The greatest news of Ali's death spread instantly, and the reaction was unlike anything seen before. Millions of people from every corner of the world paid tribute to the man who had inspired generations. Boxing greats like Mike Tyson, George Foreman, and Floyd Mayweather all shared emotional statements recognizing Ali as the man who had set the standard for greatness. World leaders, from former U.S. Presidents Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush to figures like Nelson Mandela, acknowledged his impact not just in sports, but in the fight for racial justice, human rights, and peace. President Barack Obama, in a heartfelt tribute, said, "Muhammad Ali shook up the world, and the world is better for it. We are all better for it." For days, television networks replayed Ali's most iconic moments. His victories over Sonny Liston, O. Frazier, and George Foreman, his charismatic interviews, his bold speeches against the Vietnam War, and his unwavering belief in himself and his people. Ali had been a fighter to the very end, but now, the first time in his life, he had laid down his gloves for good. Muhammad Ali's funeral was unlike any other in sports history. On June 10th, 2016, thousands of people flooded the streets of Louisville, Kentucky, Ali's hometown, to pay their respects. A 19-mile funeral procession passed through the city with fans cheering and throwing flowers onto the hearse as it carried his body one final time. The funeral service was held at the KFC Yum Center, where more than 15,000 people gathered. Among the speakers honoring Ali's legacy were former President Bill Clinton, who called him a universal soldier for our common humanity, comedian and actor Billy Crystal, who had been one of Ali's close friends, Will Smith, who had played Ali in the 2001 biopic and had grown to deeply admire the man behind the legend. Ali's family, including his wife Lonnie and his daughters, who shared heartfelt memories of their father, religious leaders from Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all spoke, reflecting Ali's belief in unity and peace among all people. Finally, as Ali's body was lowered into his final resting place at Cave Hill Cemetery, the world said goodbye to a champion who had touched millions. But as the years passed, something strange began to happen at Ali's grave, something no one could explain. A mystery was beginning to unfold, one that would leave scientists, city officials, and the world searching for answers for nearly a decade. Muhammad Ali's final resting place at Cave Hill Cemetery had been a site of peace and remembrance. Fans from around the world traveled to Louisville, Kentucky, to pay their respects, leaving flowers, boxing gloves, and heartfelt messages on his tomb. But in 2025, something strange began to happen. At first, the changes were subtle, so minor that no one noticed. But over time, something unsettling started appearing on Ali's tombstone. Deep, unnatural cracks were forming on the surface, jagged, spreading fractures that seemed to be growing with each passing month. At first, cemetery workers dismissed it as normal weathering, but something wasn't right. The other graves nearby, including those that were older than Ali's, showed no similar signs of damage. It was only Ali's tomb that was being affected, and the cracks weren't random. They seemed to radiate outward, almost as if something beneath the surface was shifting, something pushing upward. Concerned the cemetery, administration contacted a team of geologists and structural engineers to conduct a formal investigation. What they found only deepened the mystery. A team of scientists and preservation experts arrived at Cave Hill Cemetery to conduct environmental tests. They checked for water damage. No unusual moisture was detected. Soil erosion. The ground showed no significant displacement. Tree roots, no nearby roots were pressing against the crypt. Yet the cracks continued to grow, with no clear explanation. The researchers turned to advanced technology. They conducted ground-penetrating radar GPR scans to see what was happening beneath the tomb. What they found left them baffled beneath Ali's crypt. The ground was shifting in ways that defied logic. There were no sinkholes, no underground water flow, no external pressure at the subsurface layers beneath the grave were moving, creating small, unexplained shifts in the foundation of the tomb. One structural engineer reviewing the data shook his head in disbelief. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "It's like something is unsettled down there." The cemetery's caretakers were now deeply concerned. If left unchecked, these shifts could eventually cause a collapse, damaging not only the tomb, but potentially disturbing Ali's remains. The data had revealed an undeniable anomaly, but it offered no answers. Why was only Muhammad Ali's grave affected? What was happening beneath the crypt? The only way to know for sure was to open the tomb and investigate further. A decision had to be made, one that would shake the world. By early 2025, concerns about Muhammad Ali's grave at Cave Hill Cemetery had reached a breaking point. What started as minor surface cracks had become deep spreading fractures along the marble structure of the crypt. Something wasn't right. At first, cemetery officials believed the damage was simply due to natural aging. After all, monuments and headstones often develop small cracks over time. But as weeks passed, the situation became alarming. The fractures were expanding at an accelerated rate, much faster than normal weathering should allow. The patterns didn't resemble typical stress fractures, but instead seemed to originate from within the crypt, as if something inside was shifting. Even more puzzling, no other graves in the cemetery showed any similar signs of damage. Concerned that the crypt might collapse, structural engineers were called in to assess the site. What they found only deepened the mystery. Ground penetrating radar scans detected unusual underground shifts beneath the crypt. There were no signs of water damage, no signs of soil erosion, and no evidence of invasive tree roots disrupting the structure. The ground beneath Ali's tomb was moving, yet no logical explanation could be found, with the risk of structural failure growing. Cemetery officials and engineers had no choice but to consider the unthinkable. The crypt needed to be opened for further investigation, but there was one major obstacle: Muhammad Ali's family. When contacted about the situation, Ali's family was immediately hesitant. The idea of disturbing his resting place felt wrong. His burial had been a sacred moment carried out according to Islamic tradition, and they had wanted him to rest in peace. The thought of reopening his tomb was unsettling, one family member reportedly said. "He fought so hard in life, we don't want to disturb him in death." But as engineers explained the seriousness of the situation, their reluctance turned to concern. If they did nothing, the crypt could collapse unexpectedly, causing even greater disturbance and potential damage to Ali's remains. After days of careful discussion, the family agreed, but only under one condition. The process had to be handled with the utmost care and respect. With the family's approval, city officials authorized the emergency opening of the crypt. A specialized team was assembled, including structural engineers, forensic specialists, preservation experts, and religious advisors, to ensure the process was handled with dignity. Security was tightened, and the cemetery was temporarily closed to the public on the day of the opening. Every precaution was taken to protect the site and maintain the sanctity of Ali's final resting place. On a cold morning in March 2025, the team gathered at Ali's crypt. The air was still heavy with anticipation as the first tools touched the marble slab. Workers moved cautiously, aware of the significance of the moment. Scientists and engineers expected to conduct a routine structural examination, but then something happened that none of them could explain. The moment the first slab of marble was loosened, a sudden gust of cold air rushed out from the crypt. The temperature around the grave noticeably dropped, sending an unexpected chill through the air. Several team members visibly shivered. At first, no one spoke, but one fact was clear: this wasn't normal. Sealed tombs do not produce airflow once a crypt is closed. It should be completely airtight. There should be no movement of air, no temperature shift. And yet here, a cold draft had just escaped, as if something had been waiting to be released. One researcher whispered that shouldn't have happened. The unease in the air was undeniable. Some of the workers exchanged nervous glances, while others simply stood frozen, processing what had just occurred. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling creeping over them despite the growing tension. The team pressed on with the final removal of the marble slab. The crypt was now fully exposed. Bright lights were directed inside. For the first time in nearly 9 years, Muhammad Ali's resting place was open as the research team peered into the crypt. What they saw next would leave them stunned as the final slab of marble was removed. An unsettling stillness filled the air. The research team, forensic experts, and preservation specialists stood in silence as they peered into Muhammad Ali's crypt for the first time in nearly 9 years. What they expected to see was typical decay, erosion, moisture damage, perhaps some minor structural shifting. But what they found inside defied every scientific expectation. The first thing they noticed was that Ali's coffin was not resting as it should have been. Instead of lying flat, it was slightly tilted at an unnatural angle as if something had caused it to shift over time. Burial vaults are designed to remain completely stable for decades. Yet here was a coffin that appeared to have moved on its own. There were no signs of flooding, no evidence of external pressure, no logical reason for this displacement. The uneasy feeling among the team grew stronger as they looked closer. The walls of the Yikot crypt revealed another disturbing anomaly. The fractures they had seen from the outside continued inside, but they weren't random. The cracks formed distinct patterns radiating outward from the center of the crypt. This was unlike anything the structural engineers had seen before. Normal aging and weathering should have resulted in simple surface cracks. Yet these patterns suggested something else, almost as if force had been exerted from within. Then came the most baffling discovery. Yet the air inside the crypt carried a strange metallic scent, different from the musty, decayed odor usually found in burial chambers. It wasn't the smell of embalming chemicals, nor the damp, earthy scent of a typical gravesite. Instead, the aroma had an almost unnatural quality, leaving the researchers at a loss for explanation. Some of them hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. What could possibly cause such an unfamiliar and unexplainable scent in a sealed crypt, despite the growing tension? The forensic team pressed forward with their primary objective, examining the condition of the remains. Carefully, they began lifting the lid of the casket, expecting to find the usual signs of natural decomposition. But as the coffin was fully opened, every person in the room froze in disbelief. Muhammad Ali's body had barely decayed. 9 years had passed since his burial, yet his face was still recognizable. His skin, though pale and slightly sunken, remained intact in a way that should not have been possible. His hair, his eyebrows, even the contours of his features had resisted the ravages of time. Scientists were speechless. There was no logical reason for this level of preservation, even under the most carefully controlled embalming conditions. Human remains inevitably succumbed to the slow, irreversible process of decay. Yet here was Muhammad Ali, his body defying every known rule of nature. Forensic experts immediately began examining the remains, searching for an explanation. They tested for traces of preservatives that might have prolonged the preservation, but nothing beyond standard embalming chemicals was found. There was no indication that any extraordinary measures had been taken, no evidence of vacuum sealing, no unique preservation techniques that could explain why Ali's body had remained so intact. It made no sense. Some members of the team, despite their scientific backgrounds, couldn't help but feel that they were in the presence of something extraordinary. It was as if time itself had refused to claim Ali, as if even in death he remained untouched by the natural order. One researcher, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing, whispered under his breath, "This is impossible." The discovery sent shockwaves through the team. The implications were staggering. Had the crypt's conditions somehow created a perfect environment for preservation? Had Ali's body undergone some unknown biological process that resisted decay? Or was there something even more inexplicable at play? Something beyond the realm of science? No one could answer these questions. All they knew was that Muhammad Ali, the man who had defied the odds his entire life, had somehow defied time itself. Even in death, he remained an enigma. As the team continued their analysis, the weight of the moment became undeniable. Ali had always been larger than life, a man whose presence transcended boxing, politics, and culture. Now, even in death, he seemed to defy expectations. The greatest had once again done the impossible. The discovery of Muhammad Ali's remarkably preserved remains left the scientific community in shock. Investigators worked tirelessly to find an explanation, but every theory they considered led to more questions than answers. One of the first possibilities explored was the idea of natural preservation. While rare, there have been cases of bodies resisting decay under highly specific conditions. Extreme cold, dryness, or a complete lack of oxygen can slow decomposition, but none of these factors were present in Ali's crypt. The Kentucky climate was not conducive to such preservation, and the tomb had not been designed to prevent decay beyond standard embalming techniques. Forensic specialists conducted further analysis searching for traces of artificial mummification. If his body had been subjected to a unique preservation process, they would expect to find chemical compounds beyond typical. Funeral embalming fluids, however, no such substances were detected. There were no signs of vacuum sealing, additional preservatives, or any treatment that would have halted the natural breakdown of organic tissue, yet despite all logic, Ali's features remain. And eerily intact, some experts theorize that an environmental anomaly within the crypt might have played a role. Perhaps a previously unknown combination of temperature, humidity, and airflow had created an unintended preservation effect. But that theory collapsed under scrutiny. The strange fractures on the interior walls of the tomb suggested movement, something unnatural and unexplained. The cold draft that had escaped upon the crypt's opening only deepened the mystery. Cemeteries do not produce such atmospheric disturbances, and even the most experienced forensic analysts had never encountered anything like this before. Despite exhaustive efforts, there was no definitive explanation the research team composed of. Some of the most respected minds in structural engineering, forensic pathology, and preservation science could not determine why Muhammad Ali's body had remained so intact. The findings challenged everything they understood about decomposition, leaving them at a loss for words. As the investigation came to a close, attention turned to preserving Ali's final resting place with permission from his family. A team of specialists reinforced the crypt to prevent further structural shifts. The cracks were carefully sealed, and the surrounding area was stabilized to ensure that his tomb would remain undisturbed for generations to come. Every step was taken to honor the dignity of the man who had inspired millions. Ali's family, upon learning about the inexplicable condition of his remains, took it as a powerful symbol of his lasting legacy to them. This was not just a scientific anomaly, it was proof that Muhammad Ali, even in death, remained larger than life. He had defied expectations throughout his career, breaking barriers in and out of the ring. Perhaps it was fitting that his final mystery would leave the world searching for answers. When news of the discovery reached the public, the reaction was one of awe and disbelief. Fans from around the world struggled to comprehend how the greatest had seemingly defied time itself. Some saw it as a sign of his unbreakable spirit, others as an unexplainable wonder that only added to his legend. Even in death, Muhammad Ali had found a way to shock the world. His impact had never faded, and now neither would the mystery surrounding his final resting place. The man who had once declared himself the greatest of all time had once again proven why his name would never be forgotten.